Hi everyone in cloud computing and welcome to episode 17 of the Cloud Computing Australia show with Brad Nelson and the world's #1 cloud industry expert and thought leader, David Linthicum. This show is sponsored by Nelson Hilliard, cloud computing recruitment specialist placing great people in cloud, IoT, fintech and AI. This week we're excited to have as our special guest Ron Batra. Ron is a business-focused technologist with extensive experience in transformative technologies and modern architectures. Hi Dave and Ron, a warm welcome to both of you. It's exciting to have you both on the Australia show this week.
Yeah, and just accolades toward Ron. I mean, Ron's not beyond cloud. He does edge computing, fog computing, IoT-based systems, really focused on what's emerging coming forward. So he's a force in the industry. We're glad to have him on the show today. Ron, anything else to add?
Thank you, David. Thank you, Brad. Yes, my focus in recent years has been on IoT, cloud and edge and how they come together. I have been looking at physical architectures as well as application architectures and looking at the entire space end to end, trying to connect the dots between these three transformative trends that are shaping us right now.
Excellent. Well, thanks, guys. Really great to have you both on. Thanks, Ron. Well, this week we're going to be talking about IoT spending and that it's approaching the $1 trillion threshold. And so, guys, what industries do you think would leverage the boom in IoT, and what industries do you think will actually benefit the most?
So, ultimately, this becomes something that is beyond a big deal. So, in other words, as we're moving into IoT, it's fundamentally changing the way in which we're dealing with computing. And we expect everything to be connected and everything to be hooked up and everything to be working well together. And the Internet of Things is so pervasive. It's basically, I was in an IoT conference 2 years ago. And one of the gentlemen who was speaking at the conference said something very profound. He said, IoT is basically like plastic. It's in everything. And so here we are, looking at an industry that's going to be trillions of dollars, perhaps growing faster than cloud in many instances. And so, what industries are going to be the beneficial, benefit of that? Is it going to be finance? Is it going to be retail? Is it going to be all these sorts of things kind of come out? Ron, I'd love to get your perspective on this.
Yeah. So David and Brad, I do agree with you that the forecasts for IoT have been profound. And as you say, like plastics, it's going to be all pervasive. I cannot think of any system that cannot benefit from an IoT enablement, if you will. However, when I do that, there are a few things that come to my mind. And some of the design considerations are that how does the economics of IoT pan out? So when I look at that, when I put an when I put on an economist's hat on, and I look at the numbers, what jumps out to me is that industrial IoT is an area that I believe is going to hit prime time sooner than later. And the reason I simply say that is because, industrial IoT is massive machines, right? Equipment, high capital dollars. These are systems and processes that can benefit from a high degree of automation and internet enablement, which can be done through IoT. So that's one area where I believe there is enough capital in play for these systems and machines to become more efficient. Now, the second one which comes to my mind and has a huge civic need is a smart city. When we say smart city, that can mean many things to many people. I look at traffic congestion in the major metros all around the world, and I look at a interconnected system where every meter, every red light is connected to each other. Now that sounds big, but the systems of today may have to be changed dramatically to do that. The issue with a lot of smart cities is that who pays for it. And I believe that is one of the slight impediments. Would I, as a taxpayer, pay $20 extra for all my red lights, all my traffic lights to be IoT enabled? Well, I would pay for if I had less traffic congestion, right? So we got to attack those problems from a systemic perspective. I believe that industrial IoT and smart cities are very high on the list. There are people who talk about healthcare and other systems, but I really haven't had my head around those. I am putting my bets more on industrial IoT right now.
No, since this is kind of the Australian show, and I think one of the reasons I put this on is that you just mentioned something, the smart city aspect. Sydney and Melbourne are kind of undergoing a transformation into this area with the ability to kind of automate virtually everything in the cities, including red lights and monitoring for crime, and the ability to understand traffic flows and patterns, and even apply machine learning. So is this going to be something that's going to reach out of Australia going forward, or is this something that's going to be remained in a few nations that can afford it? I guess you're paying for it in your taxes, Brad. And also, what is the future of this stuff in the second tier nations that probably aren't as rich as Australia, United States, or Europe? What do you think, Ron?
So I believe it's not so much of the money spent, it's how the money is allocated. In other words, how do you prepare the business case for this? I believe that the advantages of IoT would not benefit just the advanced nations such as Australia, United States, and Europe, but even a lot of countries which are considered an economic tier below. It's simply because the problems are bigger to solve there, and the rewards are also higher. The question simply is that how does one make it scale, and how does one integrate disparate systems, and thirdly, how do you slice the business case? That to me is the key. That deciding who pays for what and in what way is going to be a big factor in deciding how IoT will scale. I mean, traffic congestion, when you look, it's not just the first world countries, second world countries, third world countries. The issue of crime, the issue of traffic management, the issues of trash collection, the issues of all the building automation systems, all that can happen in a smart city, smart pavements. I mean, it's just mind-boggling. There's no limits to it. But the biggest social issues we see are crime and traffic. Those are the ones that hit us right in our face every day.
So, Brad, I mean, you lived in two of the most monitored cities in the world. One's London. They have cameras at every corner, and they're monitoring traffic in real time. And then now you live in Melbourne, which is probably just as monitored. So do you feel like Big Brother is watching you?
I think Big Brother is a massively global epidemic, and I think it's a great way for government to keep an eye on what people are doing, but also there's a lot of data being collected with face recognition or auto face recognition, and that's also a potential haven for marketers and for big business on the whole. You've got near field connectivity with advertising, which is can be a bit intrusive, depends if you got turned on or not, where you're getting marketed as you walk down the high street by SMS or by Bluetooth or whatever. But I think going back to what Ron was saying, and I think yes, Big Brother is a massive thing, and it most definitely is paramount in all the large cities. But going back to what Ron said, and I thought it was very interesting, who's going to fit the bill for it? And I think from certainly from my point of view and looking at it from a business point of view, we would reverse engineer it. Who is going to benefit the most from IoT from a big business point of view, i.e., quicker traffic, quicker transport links. So it's obviously going to be manufacturing, transportation, etc. when it comes to that. So, in effect, that should be part of their business plan to reinvest into the city infrastructure that's going to work in their interest of getting to A to B that bit quicker. And maybe, just in my opinion, obviously, it may be that they, work out some sort of budgeting for investment into better IoT infrastructure measuring for red lights and the fluidity of the transportation within a city limit, for argument's sake, that is covered with cameras that are run by the government.
Well, actually, the whole issue of Big Brother is watching, believe it or not, I have been talking about. There used to be a TV show here in the US called Person of Interest. I don't know if you've ever watched that TV show. That's a TV show that combines facial recognition, big data, analytics, edge computing, IoT, and near field communication in almost every way you can imagine. But on top of that, it predicts bad outcomes, and it actually has a computer that does that. That show was a little bit ahead of its time. But I guess that's the worry some of us have, that the data which is out there, is that now going to be misused? And am I going to be forced to monetize? Am I going to sacrifice my privacy in order to monetize an IoT system?
Yeah, well, absolutely right. And I think, the invasion of privacy has already happened with the likes of social media, real-time social media, tagging yourself real-time. There's people using social media, and certainly the millennials, probably more than anyone, well, actually, no, not just the millennials, because I think all generations don't realise or understand the marketing algorithms or the complexities behind something like Facebook and exactly what that means with regards to traceable data, mapping mapping out where your geotags have been, etc., etc. It just goes on and on. There's just such a multi-layered functionality behind their marketing, not only from the high street branches, but from online marketing as well within Facebook or outside of Facebook within other apps that are sharing the APIs linked to Facebook. So I think there's lots of different things, and certainly in the invasion of privacy it's a given now. I think we've all agreed to the terms and conditions because we want to use the social media platforms. So there are to an element, not completely, but we've kind of in my opinion, and from people that I speak to, anyone that wants to use social media for any form of marketing or connecting with people, you've signed away, some form of your online privacy, in my opinion.
Yes, you are putting your digital footprints all over the place, right? And that's a trade-off.
And some people have bigger feet than others.
There you go. There you go. So now we talk about this IoT system, and we talk about smart cities, we talk about traffic management and near-field communication. And now we want, obviously, systems to happen and results to happen in a real-time basis, right? So that gives rise to our favorite topic, which is response time and latency. And that is one of the drivers for edge computing also. So when one looks at it, the bigger question is, does an all-pervasive IoT-driven society mean edge computing has to happen in a very robust manner for IoT in the context we're talking of? I'm not talking of maybe a temperature sensor here and there. I'm talking of doors opening when you come into a building. I'm talking of a smart city, traffic lights. Your car knows that you are within 200 feet, and the whole integrated automated system. It would seem that we need a lot of edge computing to happen, right? Maybe the round trips are too far from the cloud.
Yeah, I would agree with you. I mean, I'll give you a common example of that. When I was, dealing with drone-based, monitoring of crop fields as a prototype for a big food company, obviously transmitting the data back from the drones over the cellular network was, way too much in terms of latency for those systems. And so, in essence, we built these small computers on them, Raspberry Pis, and they gathered the information and they would basically transmit it back as soon as they got back into their docks. But taking that to the next level, we're going to have to think of different architectures in terms of how we're dealing with technology. It doesn't necessarily have to go to a centralized brain. And cloud computing, if everybody's thinking we're going to centralize things, that's really not the objective of it. The objective of it is really to have lots of these things work and play well together in a distributed environment that's able to, do things the best way it's able to do things. There's no rhyme or reason or rules that need to be applied. So edge computing to me is just something that's going to be something that addresses a necessity or basically a need. And so the ability to kind of put the information closest to where the information gathered is just a logical conclusion to what we're looking at right now.
Yeah, I just want to add to that, actually, David. You're saying about the soil, the seeds, and that data that was being collected. In Australia alone, there's companies that are developing soil sensors for farmers and also remote energy monitoring systems as well. And there's actually a startup company in Sydney which has made some headway with funding called Smart Paddock. And they're actually in the early stages of developing electronic tags that can track and monitor cattle. And the herd of cattle, obviously, quite importantly, and there's so many vast cattle ranches, obviously, in Australia. Keeping a track on them is very, very important from a health point of view, not only from a location point of view. And they're constantly collecting the biometric data and sending it back to the farmer, so he can see obviously the health and well-being and location of the cattle. So it's a pretty good startup company.
Yeah, I heard about that. I also heard about Wi-Fi enabled sheep in New Zealand, which I thought was humorous. But yeah, we're heading for that. And a lot of the innovation is coming out of Australia, which is the reason I brought it up. I mean, there's a lot of IoT-based companies and monitoring-based companies and big data-based companies that are starting to emerge out of the Australian economy, and it's pretty understandable that if they're going to really kind of lead the edge, that they're going to work on the IoT-based system, the edge computing-based system, things like that. So monitoring cattle, monitoring traffic, monitoring us, monitoring crime. Everything is going to be monitored going forward, and I think we just have the capabilities of doing it right now. Now it's the ability to take that data and do something that's going to benefit us versus just gathering it, which is one thing, but actually using it to a good end is something that's entirely different.
So one of the interesting elements I find in the IoT space, and I'd be really curious to know how the development is happening in Australia, Brad, is the triple constraint of what I call data rate, battery, and distance. And what I mean by that is if you were to make a 3-axis diagram, and one diagram, one vector is data rate, as in how much data an IoT device generates. The second vector is how much power does a device need. And the third vector is how far are you from the device that is being generating data. What happens is that there are plenty of IoT applications that need new types of networks. There are some studies by analysts that show that Wi-Fi and Ethernet and your home networks are going to, which is mostly Wi-Fi, are going to be the most prevalent for IoT. And then the mobile phones, which mobile phone networks, whether it's 4G or machine-to-machine over 4G, or it's 5G coming up, they're going to be the ones that are going to be the always-on networks. But when you talk of a sensor in the field that is collecting and the sensor has a 20-year battery life, sometimes those sensors are so small, they cannot even support a Raspberry Pi. The example, David, you were giving about a drone, and they have to come back to the home base and disengage the data. So now you're having new types of low-power networks that are coming up. And some of these just feed very, very small trickles of data, but can work with devices that have a 10-year battery life. I was curious to see what kind of, if there was any kind of data points in Australia, how these low-power networks were emerging, and if so, what kind of market segmentation they covered when you look at the overall IoT space. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it makes perfect sense.
Yeah, it does.
Sorry, David.
Go ahead, Brad.
No, I'll let you jump in on that one.
You're sitting in Australia.
Yeah, I'm sitting in Australia, but I'm definitely going to let you answer that question first, and I'll jump in after your answer.
Yeah, I think that the low power stuff is really starting to take off, and that's really one of the industries that's starting to emerge in Australia, as well as building the sensors, the devices, high bandwidth communications with very small footprints, and also compute at the edge, storage and processing, things like that. It's kind of funny. We thought the days of the microcomputer were going away, but we're getting better and better at them as we're building in these IoT devices. But we're also realizing that low power systems and things like that are really kind of the ways in which we tune these things up. So a lot of that stuff's coming out of Australia. It's probably more so in the United States in aspects of it, in terms of the United States needs to work on the big data stuff and the cloud-based stuff, things like that. So I suspect it's going to be a larger market going forward.
Yeah. Well, I think there are some movements in Europe also, from what I've heard. There are some European companies also, I think, which are trying to lead the way and are doing a lot of active research in that.
No, go ahead, Brad. I think it's Australia, Europe, and China that are kind of driving the whole sensor development stuff. When I was at the IoT conferences, that's primary countries the countries of origin I saw the technologists.
Yeah, I mean, the low power networks, as David pointed out, the low power networks is an area that is coming up. I think the question is, when you boil it down into the amount of total data processed by IoT, if you were to make a pie chart and the low power is only this much, then by very definition, it means it's going to be maybe a 10 to 15% subset of the market. And that's just a number I'm making up. It's not I have active research. But if you look at data as a piece of the pie chart, that is one way to look at the market size, because ultimately that data has to flow somewhere, or that data has to be flushed away. When I say flushed away, the use case is edge computing, right? So I am collecting a bunch of data from a building all day long. I don't need all of the data to be sent to the cloud. Maybe my edge should be intelligent. The edge should be able to figure out, guys, I'm getting this so much of data. 98% of it's noise. I just want to get the outliers and a median, and that's all I need to send. I don't need to collect every data point selected every 5 minutes to the cloud. So that kind of logical processing is done at the edge by some kind of an ecosystem that has a few dimensions to it. You need an edge software. you need some compute, you need a network that connects to the backbone network, and you need some kind of infrastructure, some kind of an enclosure that can run this edge computing. Is that a cable hut? Is that a micro data center? Or is that a regular data center just happens to be near to the source of action where the data is being generated? And then how do you cool it? How much power does it need? Those are some of the design considerations I believe that go into the deciding an edge system. When I say edge system, I mean the whole ecosystem. I mean the data center, the software, the hardware, the infrastructure, the compute, and the network that make up the entire enclosure, if you will.
Yeah, where our propellers are spinning at full speed on top of our heads, Ron. So let's kick it back to
okay, sorry.
Let's kick back to Brad to bring us down to earth. That's all right.
Guys, I've thoroughly enjoyed today's show. I think we've covered some really interesting aspects of, the Internet of Things and how it's aspiring to be a $1 trillion business. Really, it's been very enjoyable. Ron, thank you for being part of the Australia show this week. It's been great having you on board.
Thank you, Brad. It was my pleasure. Thank you, David.
My pleasure to have you, Ron. Thank you very much. You had a great perspective.
Yes, and thank you, David, for being part of the Australia show as well for another week, which is fantastic. Thanks for watching, everyone. Remember, you can reach us on Twitter, which is at Ron Batra. David's on Twitter, which is at David Linthicum. And I'm also on Twitter, which is at Nelson_Hilliard. Remember to like, comment, and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss out on any of these videos. And thanks again for watching.